Happy New Year to everyone. You may be surprised that I'm wishing you Happy New Year. It's not January, but in the Orthodox faith, our spiritual New Year begins on September 1st. We don't disavow the New Year's that comes in January, but we look at this as the beginning of our spiritual journey throughout a year. It begins, really the first feast of the year is the birth of the Virgin, which comes this Saturday. And from there, the Mother of God being born, the whole year unfolds before us. And so, like we have so traditionally done in January, with many of the resolutions we have about diets and weights and all sorts of little promises we make in January, we make certain promises and vigilances in September as well, as we begin to set our foot on the new year. We reconcile the year that has been and what we've done, and we look to the year ahead of us, trying to see what we might do and what we could do in either greater capacity or in some way to deepen our lives as spiritual men and women of God. And what better passage to begin that than St. Paul's when he says in the beginning of it, "Watch, stand fast in the faith, be brave, be strong. Let all that you do be done with love." This is as much a beginning as we could take if we would drink that in and look at it ourselves. Watch, stand fast in the faith, be brave, be strong. Let all that you be done with love. And all of this relates very well to the gospel passage today that we have about those stewards that forgot who their owner was, who owned the vineyard, not their owner, but who owned the vineyard, and treated so shabbily, and finally treated the son, killed the son, only to find themselves in grave circumstances themselves after having acted in such a horrible way. Several years ago, one of the people in our church's mother, who was also a member of our church, put his mother in a nursing home. And he put his mother in a home right around the corner from here, so that I would be able to go and visit her easily and see her on a regular basis, of which I said I would. I said I'd go and see her every week. And so I began that process, and it was delightful. I would take her communion, we would chat, and have a nice time, and then I'd leave. But as time went on, she became less and less able to have those conversations that we had in the beginning. She got older and older, and would repeat herself 100 times. And the temperature of the nursing home, which I didn't notice at the first, seemed to go up and up and up to where I'd be sitting in a room and it was 100 degrees, and I'd be sitting there talking to her and falling asleep the whole time and basically hating it. So after a certain amount of time, I began to gradually ease off of going to see her into the place where I would see her very, very infrequently, thinking that she wouldn't even notice anyway. She thought her mind had pretty well gone. And after a certain amount of time, I went back to see her and went into the room and sat down and looked at her, and she looks up at me and she says, "Where have you been?" And I babbled off something, feeling horrible for not keeping up a commitment that I had made, something that I had promised that I would do. But when it got uncomfortable, I didn't look imaginatively at how I might be able to do this thing and accomplish it and keep the promise that I had made. I just slacked off on it and began to disappear and began to hate the thought. You have thoughts like, "Oh gosh, I hope she'd die soon," and things like that. Horrible thoughts that come to your mind just because of the inconvenience of it all, which is so often how we relate to this gospel passage today. They began to hate the owner of the vineyard because they wanted it for themselves. It wasn't theirs, but they wanted it. So therefore, they began to hate the person who owned it and do terrible things when we kept asking for it back. That is so often what we do with the commitments that we make, and that's why I bring it up at this time of the year. So often we begin to hate the commitments that we make after we make them so zealously in the beginning. Tithe, for example, and giving to the church. I'm hardly ever talk about this, but it's the first of the year, why not? Let's start off on a good foot. You know, when zealously I sit down with people and I say, well, one of the commitments of the church is that we tithe, or we try to give as much as we can. We support the church and all of that. And everyone goes, yes, that's so wonderful. That's a wonderful thing to do. But as time goes on and circumstances change, and we have all sorts of things that come up that require our money or our interests or our time, and we begin to move away from that. And in a certain sense, we begin to hate the thought of giving to the church because it's inconveniencing us, not because it's a bad thing, not because it's not the right thing to do, but it challenges our pleasures and the things that we'd rather be spending the money on as we've kind of recommitted ourselves to the world. It's very common that happens. It even happens in marriages. The zeal that we have in the beginning, the love that we have. After a while, though, the person becomes commonplace to us. They're saying the same things, looking the same way, getting older. That, in our church, is really the truth. And we begin to look and go, and we look at the marriage, and our commitments that we made begin to change. And in our own ways, we begin to hate the things that we have pledged ourselves to. But the truth of the matter is, we're known as Christians by how we stand for the things that we commit ourselves to, how we deliver on those things, how we stay by them. Even when things get difficult, they're always easy in the beginning. It's always easy to pledge yourself to things that are difficult. And it's always easy to do them for a while. Excuse me. But after a while, we begin to get complacent and find ourselves in the same situation that these men were in, these stewards of the vineyard. We hate the things we've committed to. Now, some things need to be changed. This is another thing that we might find in ourselves that calls for courage, which is something that we need to have in the beginning of the year. You need to look at the things that you're doing that maybe you haven't spoken up about. Maybe you haven't stood for the poor in a way that you should. Maybe you haven't helped someone in a way that you should, not through commitment, but just through your own lives, because it would be too much of an effort, and so on. Sometimes we need to be courageous. We need to find in ourselves the depth to change the things that are not right that we see, but that we've kept quiet about and haven't done anything about at all. I know that you have things like that in your life. I know that you have people that you wish you would help, but you just don't feel like you could. But maybe you should take a deep breath. Maybe you should say, I need to find it in myself to help where I have not helped before, to do where I have not done before, to live a life that is charitable and caring. Let all things be done, as St. Paul says, with love. Let everything that you do be done with love. I told this story yesterday in the funeral, but most of you weren't there, so I want to tell it again. I got out of my car on Friday at 2 p.m, right outside the church. And so often in the work that we do with the poor, the food work that we do, I am besieged by people as I get out of the car with requests beyond the feeding program that we have, the food that we give to everyone. And after a while, after years and years of this, it frankly gets on my nerves. And I try to find ways to zoom into the church so that I won't be asked for the money for bus fare or a sack of food in addition to what we already give or whatever is being asked. And Friday was no different. I got out of the car and a man was looking there. I saw he wanted to talk to me. I was in my usual grumpy, I don't want to bother with you mood. And started to zoom in, but he stood in front of me. and wouldn't let me go in. And he said, I almost opened my mouth and said, yeah, I know. What is it that you want? Yes, that's almost what I said. But something, maybe it was just that he spoke before I could say that. But anyway, he looked at me and he said, I just heard that your mother-in-law had died, and I wanted to tell you how sorry I was to hear that, and I wish that you convey my condolences to your family. Oh, if I had opened my mouth. And so you can see that. I mean, I'm sure that isn't something that hasn't happened to you as well, where if you've opened your mouth and said something when you thought a person's intention was one way, and really it was something entirely different in which they were acting in kindness and goodness, but you only saw, out of your hurriedness, something that was negative until they really said something very positive and wonderful. This is the kind of things that we have to be watchful about when St. Paul says, watch. Be attentive to yourself. That you don't like for myself, do not let myself drift into that place where I would be rude and nasty and forget the reason that I'm doing the things that I'm doing them for the Lord and not for myself, not for my own pleasure and my own ability to have a nice life and be comfortable, but I'm doing them for Jesus Christ. I'm doing them because I want to do them, not because I was forced to. Always remember that. When you make a commitment to tithe, when you've made a commitment to someone, you've made it because you wanted to do that. You said yes to that. No one forced you, in most cases. No one forced you to do it. And you've said yes to that. Keep your commitments. Stand up for them. Be courageous. Be men and women of God. Stand up for the poor and the halt and the maimed and those that can't stand up for themselves. And speak out for them when you can, if it's possible. And keep your mouth shut like I need to do when we should not be opening our mouths and saying things that we'll regret later. These are all the kind of things that really, truthfully, the Lord rewards us for these things in our lives when we do them. Excuse me. As you see, I've got a cough. I've had it for a couple of years. And I had found that the solution to the cough was that I would go to the best clinic in the world and they would examine it and do that. That's Mayo's Clinic. And there was one down in Jacksonville. And so I was going next week. I got a bill this week. I got a bill from a doctor for one of the little visits. And because of some screw up with the insurance company, the bill was a lot higher than what it was. It wasn't anything exorbitant, but it was higher than what it was. And I set the bill down, and you know how your tendency is just to forget about something like that and leave it, for later. You'll take care of it and all of that. But something inside of me just, this is over a bill now, remember? This isn't over what seemingly important things. But anyway, I decided I'd call up the insurance company and find out why there was this difficulty. And I called them up. It was only one thing that they needed. They needed to know whether I had any other insurance companies besides them. As soon as the lady heard that, she said, okay, well, we'll just recycle this bill and everything will be fine. It was very simple. But then suddenly I said, oh, by the way, I'm going down to Mayo's Clinic next week. Is it on my insurance policy? And she looked for a second and said, no, it's not. And I said, well, what will be the cost of going down there? And she said, well, before anything begins, it's $7,000 deductible. And if I had just inadvertently, and then she said some exorbitant rate that it would be. She said, when a provider is not on our accounts, it's just, the price of it is exorbitant. I'd have zoomed down there, made all the arrangements, gone down there, and found that out down in Florida, that I wouldn't have been able to afford it. And I'm thinking, oh my God, thank you for opening my mouth. I'm here, I'm kissing the bill that I had. And I call up the doctor, the doctor's office, and I thank him. I said to the nurse, I want you to tell the doctor how grateful I am for this bill I got from you. I'm so appreciative Of course, she thought I was crazy, but I was. But it's not that. The thing that I was so appreciative of was the fact that I knew that came from God. Somehow, just the course of something is as insignificant as that bill, and the whole process of it got me out of a jam that I would have been in much more inconvenience later on. These are the kind of things that happen to us in life all the time. I bet you could stand up and tell me a story like that happened to you just this week. Something in which there could have been a small or a larger disaster in your life, but somehow things got turned around. Somehow. How did that happen? Of course, it happened because God is in your life. Because the Lord is looking out for you and me. He's looking out for us. He's taking care of us. He's watching out for our lives. Yes, it's real. It's not something that we're making up or that somehow is in our minds in a way. It's a real thing that God loves us and that He's taking care of us as His children in every situation in our lives. What a comfort in life. What a blessing to know that so. And so much so when we know that we have a responsibility, that we have to keep up ourselves, to be vigilant, to watch, to stand fast in the faith. You know, standing fast in the faith is something that I want to say something on as well. In the world today, it seems like there are so many good causes that we could stand up for and really feel important, would be important. Anything that deals in human beings being treated poorly, even if it goes against our faith, we still feel that there's a weight and a balance of people not being treated right by society, or not given the jobs that they want to have, or not being allowed to marry if they want to marry, or so on and so on. All these things in our society that seem so generous and so good. And they may be opposed to our faith. It may not be the way that our faith puts them forth. But we, wanting to be good members of our society and be in touch with everyone else, we begin to say, those things are the things that I want to stand up for, and we compromise our faith. The only thing we need to do in situations like that is what St. Paul says in this gospel. Let everything that you do be done with love. Never with condemnation of others, no matter what the lifestyle that they live. Never a condemnation of others if it's not the same belief as ours. Let everything that you do be done with love. But don't compromise the faith. Stand up for what you believe in. Be courageous. Your faith is beautiful. You've been given it. This is a great blessing that we have to be Orthodox Christians. Stand up for that and live by it. But live by it with love for others and care for them, no matter what their lifestyle and no matter how they choose to live their lives, if it's not the same as ours, as long as it doesn't hurt others. Just let them be and love them. Let us stand up for these things. It's a new year. Let's begin the new year right. Let's try, in my case, to be more caring and loving of others, more considerate, more vigilant, more caring for those in need, and so on. But maybe that's something that you need to do as well, that we all need to do together. We need to walk this walk and talk this talk in a way that is Christian, loving, and caring. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen.